Many of us have had moments in our life that can only be described as terrible, heartbreaking, painful, devastating, insurmountable, hopeless, fill in the blank. Not good moments, right? Disruptive moments in our life. Things are going well, and then all of a sudden, you get the phone call. Now, it wasn't necessarily life-altering as far as life and death, but last week or 2 weeks ago, I was chatting with Mom about a few things, and I had just sent her to her office with her list, make sure that, she's doing her job and, got her squared away. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, of course. She was actually doing that to me. And she said, I'm leaving. Jason just broke his arm. And, of course, it wasn't a threat to his life or anything, but not a good call. But it just reminded me again how quickly that phone call can change the entire outlook of a day, a week, your life. I remember exactly. I can close my eyes and see it like it was yesterday. The phone call that I got when Josh and Chelsea were going to the hospital. And I know exactly where I was, in the church parking lot. And I just thought, shoot, first of all. And then I thought, I'm going to remember where I was on this day. And you remember that, 9/11, or whatever the case may be. There's moments like that, right? Disruptive moments. Things are going well, and then, boom, different for the rest of your life. The pain resulting from those trials, they cause a lot of different things, and different things for different people, right? Whether it be loss of sleep, hours of deep reflection, depression, hopelessness, fear, anxiety, PTSD, endless questions, anger at God. Fill in the blank. An unnatural response to an unnatural situation is natural, right? And we can't necessarily always control how we're going to react to that news right there. But for the believer, of course, pain, that disruptive moment is supposed to draw us closer to God. And it's easier to say that to someone else. It's not easy to say that when it's you and you think, all right, this is going to be a good thing. Because at the moment, and quite literally, it's not a good thing. So it's a bad thing. The Bible is more than black letters on white pages, right? It is God's roadmap to help us navigate life. It's not a rule book of minute laws. It's a guidebook of great principles. So the Word of God was given to us to direct us specifically when we need strength in trouble. We can find one of those passages when we're in trouble in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And this is the Apostle Paul kind of just being transparent and honest with the church at Corinth, right? Let's look at verse 7. Unless I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh. We know it wasn't his mother-in-law because he wasn't married, so we can rule that out. We don't know what it was, but it wasn't that. You think, oh boy, the messenger of Satan to buffet me. See, you think, oh, it could have been. Maybe he was. Lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, that it might depart from me. When I read that verse, I can't help but think of Jesus in the garden. Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but thy will be done. But Jesus said, this thing that I'm about to do, it's not going to be fun, right? Not just the physical pain, but more importantly, and something that we'll never understand or experience, the fact that Jesus became sin for us. The fact that the perfect, holy Son of God, God in the flesh, became everything that you ever were. Jesus became a liar. He became a murderer. He became an adulterer. He became an abuser of all sorts. That was not, we can't even comprehend that. For estimated 60 billion people that have come across this earth, Jesus became all of those things for all of those people. Jesus said, I don't want to do it, but not as I will. So he knew what was going to happen, and that's what Paul said. I besought the Lord thrice that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, here's the answer that Paul got from God. My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Not necessarily the answer Paul was looking for. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. I just want to look at 4 thoughts here. Number 1, the purpose of our weakness. The purpose of our weakness. Chapter 12, verse 7, unless I should be exalted above measure. Paul clearly states here, at least for him in his life, the reason that he believed he had this difficulty, this thorn in the flesh, was to deliver him from the sin of pride. The Apostle Paul had a lot of spiritual privilege, right? The Lord had done a lot of things for him. He mentions, what does he say here? Exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations. God had really revealed to him a lot. A lot of the New Testament was written by the pen of Paul. And he said, just so I didn't get a big head, and just so I didn't think that I'm Dr. Big Bottom, God gave me a thorn in the flesh. Now, I'm not saying that every difficulty in your life is from God. All right, we're going to get to that in a second. Trials in our life, they come from multiple places. And a lot of people, they like to point the finger at God and say, God, it's your fault. They forget to think about maybe Satan as an option, or the consequences of sin, or just the natural course of life. What did Solomon say? Time and chance happeneth to us all. But get this, God is the only one who uses disruptive moments to keep things in perspective. All the other things, the consequence of sin, that comes because of the consequence of sin. Satan is putting disruptive moments in our life to try to distract us and get us to turn away from God, or to curse God, or to keep us from being saved, keep us from being an effective witness. God, though he may not be the one who's putting that moment in our life or putting that thing in our life, he can use those things for our good and for our benefit. Not all trials come from God, but God can use all the trials for our benefit and for his glory. What does the Bible say? It says, is it in James? Is it James? Count it all joy when you fall in the divers temptations. That's James, correct? That word divers there, it's not talking about different, although it does. It is talking about different types of trials and difficulties, but also it's talking about different origins. Trials where we don't know the origin. There's things in our life where we know where they come from. When you have a blessing come into your life, we know where that came from. Because the Bible says every good gift and every perfect gift cometh from above. Right? So every blessing you have in your life comes from God. But the difficulties or trials or circumstances in your life, they can come from different places. I just mentioned a few. Okay? They come from Satan. Satan trying to trip you up. Satan trying to oppress you. They can come from God. God does not put difficulty in your life to hurt you and say, oh, look I put that into his life. Haha, look at him crying. God's not a monster. But sometimes God allows us to go through things because, we pray for something, and God says, all right, I'll answer that. And then he starts to answer it, and then we say, well, God, I don't want that. And God says, I'm answering your prayer. But he's answering it in the way that he knows best, and maybe the beginning of the answer to that prayer looks like a difficulty or a trial or a time of waiting. Okay, so sometimes those things are from God. They're not difficulties or trials. They're just times of waiting, or maybe the Lord has to remove someone from our life in order to get what we ask for. Or it can be the consequence of sin. I was just talking to someone after church. He said, how can God allow all of these bad things to happen? I said, not all bad things that happen are because of God. A lot of them are the consequence of sin. If you go to the bar and get slop drunk, then you get in your car and drive it into the ditch, hit a tree, and die, and someone says, oh, God killed that person. No, they killed themselves because they were inebriated beyond cognitive function and crashed themselves. That's a result of sin. God said, don't look on the wine when it moveth itself, because something bad might happen. Okay? That's from the Message Bible, all right? That's not the King James. That's a paraphrase. But what he's saying is keep yourself from some difficulties. Don't sin so bad things won't happen to you. But often we choose to go against God's law, and then when something bad happens, then we say, oh, God, look at what you're doing to me. No, often it's just a consequence of sin. And then also some difficulties come into our lives just because we're on earth, an imperfect world filled with imperfect people. And if you live in the woods and a tree falls on your car, it could just be because trees fall down. You know what I mean? And that's what it says in the book of Ecclesiastes. If a tree falleth, there it is. It doesn't mean that it had any other reason other than the fact that the tree fell down. So we look at the pain of the trial. There is purpose to it all, and God is the only one who can take the difficulties of life and use them for our good, to draw us closer to Him, and to use them for His glory. Number 2, we see the pain of weakness. Many men have speculated about Paul's thorn in the flesh, what that was. They said maybe it was an eye problem. Can you imagine the Apostle Paul trying to pen these letters while in a dark prison? And if he had trouble seeing, and he loved these churches, and he really wanted to write to them, and he wanted to write more, but he couldn't because he couldn't see, that would be a thorn in the flesh. That would be a difficulty. Maybe it was seizures. Many guess that the Apostle Paul had seizures, or malaria from being in these different prisons. I think of Brother Michael got malaria from being on a missions trip, and he was in the hospital and nigh unto death. Malaria, no good. Any type of physical pain from any of his floggings and beatings and being stoned, shipwrecked. He was on the island. We talked about that on a Wednesday. I mean, Paul was pushed to the brink of death who knows how many times, kind of lived there for a lot of his life. Maybe it wasn't physical at all. Maybe it was regret or remorse from the Christians that he persecuted. And he would have night terrors or PTSD from dragging believers and watching them being brutally murdered, crucified, tortured, boiled in oil. And he was the one who sought them out and took them to do that. Maybe that was born in the flesh. There's a beauty in not knowing what was causing the Apostle Paul this pain, because often others can't see what it is that's causing us pain, right? You're the only one who knows, or maybe a select few or your family, and they can't see that. And they don't know that you put on a good front and you function and you look functional, but at the end of the day you go home and it's difficult. You have a thorn in the flesh. If God's grace, though, was sufficient for the Apostle Paul, His grace is sufficient for us as well. So we see the purpose of Paul's weakness. We see the pain. Let's look at the provision in weakness. Verse 9. He said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength. God promised the Apostle Paul 2 things, grace and strength. We talked about this the first week where we were talking about encouraging words. We have God's strength. We have everything. What a great promise. We have saving grace, which is the grace by which we're saved. Ephesians 2:5, even when we were dead in sins, hath He quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved. We also have living grace to help us be more like Him and to live more like Him. 2 Corinthians 9:8, and God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. Then we also have God's strength. Psalm 18:2, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. A lot of other people, they worship other gods. They're not a very present help. They're a very dead, symbolic help that in fact is no help. You can call on Buddha, he ain't there. You can call on Muhammad, he's not there. You can call on Jesus Christ, you can call on God, he's always there, right? Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. We're better off on our worst day with God than we are on our best day by ourselves. And lastly, I want to look at this, the perspective from weakness. Paul understood that he was weak. And because he understood that, but also he understood that he had God's purpose through the pain, he had a different perspective on that thorn in the flesh. So here Paul gets the quote-unquote bad news. He learns that the thing that he asked God to remove 3 times, he learns God said, not going to happen, not removing it. But I'm going to do something better for you. Here's the key. Look, notice the Apostle Paul's response to learning that he was going to continue to be weak. He was going to continue to have a difficulty. Middle of verse 9, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Here's where it comes down to brass tacks. Would you rather have a difficulty with Christ, or would you rather have a perfect life without him? We say, obviously, I'll take the life with Christ, but you get into that difficulty a little bit, you go down that road, and we start to question that. You get 5, 10 years in, and I'm one to talk because I haven't been in a difficulty for that long. Some of you have lived much longer, and you've dealt with maybe the loss of a child or a parent for 10, 20, 30 years and had that eat at you. And that difficulty you've carried with you. Right? I don't know what that's like for the most part. You do. But we're better off by the Apostle Paul's testimony with that difficulty with God than we are with no difficulties without him. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecutions, in distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. What an incredible response to a difficulty. What an incredible response to quote-unquote bad news, right? Paul said it pleasured in his infirmities. The infirmities is talking about specifically physical weaknesses. Some of you have physical limitations now because of health or maybe just because of age, and that's a difficult thing for you to kind of understand that what I used to be able to do, the Incredible Hulk has turned into the Incredible Chunk, and now, you just can't do what you used to be able to do. Ladies, you used to be able to do different things and spend more, time in the kitchen or doing things that you enjoy, and now you can't because you have arthritis or whatever it is. You can't see as well. Physical illnesses. Reproaches, that's talking about insults that lead to injury. I do not enjoy reproaches. I do not enjoy someone saying, I don't like what you have to say to me, whether that's while you're witnessing or, just someone maybe over social media. It is not fun. Necessities, meaning distresses in need, meaning you have things because you've chosen to live for Christ and maybe not make the dollar your God. There's times where the dollars run short and you have needs and necessities. And I am thankful that I don't even know what it's like to even be remotely close to poor or impoverished. But times when money's short and you get tight and you wonder, there's more week than there is paycheck this week. That's a necessity. But Paul said he gloried in that. He gloried in persecutions. We have not even sniffed persecution like the Apostle Paul had. Physical persecution. Someone walking in here. Someone just mentioned this week that I forget what country it is. I want to say it was maybe in Korea. There was a group about like this. There was about 100 people. They were having a church service. This is like last week. Weren't harming anybody, but another religious group came in and beat the entire congregation. Took about 200 militant people. They didn't kill anybody, but all of them went to the hospital because they beat them bad. That's persecution. Would you show up next Sunday? We had a coffin, a lot of us didn't. Now, we didn't exactly know where that was, and now we kind of have a better idea. But if a cold can keep you out of church, a militant group beating you within an inch of your life certainly is going to. Do we endure persecution? Do we truly believe I would rather obey God than men? Distresses, which is calamity and anguish and distress. Paul said he gloried in all that. So we're going to wrap this thought. So Paul tells us all about his weaknesses. Was the Apostle Paul weak? Was Paul a passive person? Absolutely not. If you read in the book of Acts throughout Paul's trial where he's appearing between Crispus and Ananias and Felix and King Agrippa, Paul sometimes he was a little bit of a rebel-rouser. He liked to take people's words and throw them back in his face, and I think sometimes he had to, like he just says here. So I didn't get too haughty here, so I didn't get lifted up in pride. Paul was very knowledgeable. The Bible says that knowledge puffeth up, right? So the Apostle Paul was very smart. He was quick-witted, and he was not passive at all. He gave the gospel and planted churches really in some of the most difficult places. Hey, I'm going to go plant a church in Ephesus. Anybody want to go with me? Flat horizon. No no volunteers to plant a church in Ephesus. It was a tough place. He preached the gospel to people who he knew were going to beat him, but he still did. So he wasn't passive. He wasn't weak. Think about before he was saved, what was he doing? He was very zealously seeking out believers. He was opposite of soul winning, but he was doing it very vigilantly. And then once he got saved, he just continued to do it. He just did it the opposite. He became a soul winner. He endured beatings and stonings and whippings and prison and shipwrecks for the gospel's sake. Paul chose the most, as we mentioned, the most hostile places to start churches. So that begs the question, how can you be weak and strong at the same time? We find it at the end of verse 10. For when I am weak, then am I strong. When you are at your weakest point, when you get to the point where you say, you know what? I can't do it. You're in a great spot. Because now you have nowhere to go but up. And now you can depend on no one but God. You can't depend on yourself. You can't depend on your family or your mom and dad. When you get to the point where you look up and you say, God, you're going to have to get me out of this one. God says, I got you. And sometimes in order for God to make us the most strong, he has to get us to the point where we're the most weak. So we're willing to just say, go ahead, take it. I surrender. We talked about that this morning, right? I'm not committed to you. I'm surrendered to you because I got nothing to offer. I'm done. I'm at my wit's end. That's where Paul was. But he said at that point, that's when he was the strongest. So I want to encourage you that when you feel that you're at your weakest, in whatever aspect of your life it is, when you're at your weakest, that's where you're at your strongest if you allow God to have control in your life. The question is, will you? Will you allow God to have control in whatever that area is, whether it's finances or prayer, Bible reading, your mind, your thought life, your actions, your relationships? Will you allow God to show his strength in your weakness? If you do, you'll be the strongest person that you could ever be.